All right, what's going on, guys, and welcome back. So today we're going to be checking out a video from Nerdslayer Studios that actually one of you guys sent to me and asked to remain anonymous. So I couldn't not check it out when one of you guys said that. So this video is called Death of a Game Temtem. Now, I've talked about Temtem being sort of like quote-unquote dead for a long time. You could check out any of my previous videos about that linked below, but this video goes like way into depth with it. The first 7 minutes or so is more so recap, so you can check that out linked below if you're interested in watching the full thing from Nerdslayer. You can go give him a sub. But yeah, we're going to be checking it out, and I'm going to be sort of giving my context as someone who was kind of like on the ground floor when Temtem launched and had covered it extensively. I did 2 Let's Play series, one for the Steam and one for Switch when it came out. I did tons of guides and stuff like that. I've interacted with the dev team and stuff, and I think I have a pretty well-rounded experience with the whole situation. It's sort of like kickstarted my channel, so I thought this would be interesting to watch, so that's what we're going to be doing today. And yeah, it's a little bit longer, so enjoy. It's going to be a bit of a longer video.
If Temtem wasn't unique enough, the comparisons to Pokemon, while cool and helpful at first, would actually turn toxic and quite negative.
I don't know where he's going to go with the toxic thing. I haven't watched this video yet. I will say one thing. There is a subsect of the Temtem community that's extremely toxic, and at least at the time. So we'll see where he goes from there.
First, for Crema Games, their modest $70,000 ask for a Kickstarter would be met.
Oh yeah,
met easily,
got overfunded,
reaching a whopping $500,000 instead. But before we move on from the initial Kickstarter, there are some keys we must cover concerning a Kickstarter first, as these keys are going to help us later on in the case. First, we have Crema Games describing Temtem as a massively multiplayer creature collection adventure.
Okay, they so many times used the MMO tag as like a marketing tool, right? Oh, the game's an MMO, it's massively online, blah blah blah. But then when people started being like, yo, we want some MMO features in our game, they're like, no, it's actually like an MMO light, guys. We swear, it's an MMO light, guys.
Now, obviously this genre doesn't exist due to it being so niche and, well, underdeveloped. But the idea is obviously trying to invoke ideas and feelings of massiveness, which is only involved in one style of virtual world and thus game. The massive variant of virtual worlds, also known as MMORPGs. The problem being, and you could tell this from the alpha footage even, Temtem wasn't massive, and it wasn't an MMORPG.
Yeah.
No matter how much they would make the game grindy in ways, that would never fix that.
Yeah, they took the negative aspects of an MMO, like the focusing on the economy, the grind, and when I say negative, I mean more so like in a vacuum, they're more negative, right? Like making things harder to get because you care about the economy, making the game grindy. They took all of those aspects of an MMO that like in a vacuum kind of suck for a lot of people, like if translated to a single player game, and then they just didn't add any of the cool stuff that an MMO would have, right? Or at least not a lot of the cool stuff that an MMO would have. Like there are so many cool things that they could have done with Temtem, like have like a RuneScape wilderness-esque area would be kind of cool, right? Having like just more like multiplayer features in general. This is more like a single player RPG with people that you can see. That's basically what Temtem is, and they marketed it heavily as an MMO. They've apologized for this, but as I've stated in a video before, it's like, oh yeah, sorry guys, we marketed it bad, but you know, we're apologizing now after we got all the money for marketing it like that. Like it's kind of like no.
Not only was it being modeled after a Japanese game and IP, which is a market that doesn't even make MMORPGs besides arguably Final Fantasy XIV, it was featuring a similar world system to the OG and pioneer of the ORPG industry in Japan, the same one that basically formed the industry for Japan, and thus the virtual world market there.
I feel they could do a JRPG MMO for like a Pokemon-esque game. It just has to be done. It has to be done right.
Phantasy Star Online. PSO, as a
like Temtem had the potential. It wasn't the fact that it was a JRPG. they kind of just like botched the execution of the MMO aspect. Like, don't get me wrong, Temtem's not a bad game if you're going to play it as a single player game, but as an MMO, it definitely falls flat. They focus way too much on PvP and like just adding nonsense to the game than they did on actually like expanding the world. Like, they literally said they don't want to keep expanding the world and keep adding updates, but it's an MMO, but it's not an MMO anymore. Like it's just, that's what it was. Temtem was kind of picked up and put down, unfortunately. Like, they treated it like a single player game when it was convenient and marketed it as an MMO when it was convenient.
It's often dubbed was based on channels that you could select, and each map and instance was then fairly limited in the amount of players that you could play with due to the structure of the game. Still, it would allow for players all over the world to play together, enjoying what would become known as the ORPG or Online Action RPG market, or PSO-like. The reason this is relevant, and I've been banging this drum for decades, is if you don't properly qualify and classify a virtual world, people will just be misled about it, or let down with their experience. People who expect massive amounts of players when playing Japanese online RPGs are just going to be let down, because it's not what the design in those games are focused on. You're barking up the wrong tree. Kodama Games from the beginning did little to dissuade the MMO comparisons, and
yeah, they actively used the MMO comparisons.
thus, with that, came expectations of large form content and a consistent stream of it too.
Yeah, and then when they decided they didn't want to, have the baggage associated with an MMO anymore, they dropped they were like, no, not an MMO anymore.
Because it's nice when you get the
It never was, guys, never was.
benefit of using the name and tag, right? The
Yeah.
popularity and coverage. But bad when people start asking questions.
Exactly.
Like, wait, why isn't this game as it's described?
Yeah.
There was nothing wrong with Kodama Games describing their game as an online cooperative, focused creature taming game. I mean, that's
Monster
literally
taming.
what Guild Wars 1 called itself, without the monster taming parts, of course. And that was effectively the West's answer to Phantasy Star Online. But Kodama Games failing to understand the virtual world market made them essentially promise fans a mixture of both a massive one and the more production, front-loaded, and combat and shiny stuff focused, smaller online RPG variant that was so popular in Japan. Now, to be fair, Temtem also clearly states on its Kickstarter it was trying to be less of a big online game and focus more on cooperative play.
Yeah, and they mentioned that as well. They're like, well, like deep into our Kickstarter, it said this, and it's like, yeah, but you guys used the MMO as marketing everywhere and never said anything publicly. Like, people shouldn't have to go to your Discord server or like deep within your Kickstarter campaign to get like that sort of basic information when everybody's saying it's an MMO and you guys are like, yeah, it's Temtem's an MMO RPG.
But talking about being massive with a co-op focus is a bit of a contradiction. That's why Guild Wars 1 never tried to market itself like an MMORPG. Instead, it called itself a co-RPG, which literally translated to cooperative RPG. Temtem had the DNA of this built into it. But also, and this was noticeable even in the playable alpha for certain pledgers, where players could notice that Temtem was going to feature some common MMORPG aspects, like tough progression, a focus on the economy, but the divided focus for the game would likely end up making things a bit more difficult for the inexperienced, small development team. Especially when now they needed to be good at understanding two different genres and combining them together effectively. But there was another issue with the Kickstarter before we push on. When explaining their reason for Kickstarter, Kodama Games would state that although they had been entirely self-funded before that, they primarily wanted to go to Kickstarter for the community creation reasons, wanting to have an open development, which I actually think is great for virtual worlds. Problem is after this Kickstarter, they would actually grab a publisher and Humble Bundle, who they would cite would allow them to obtain potentially more options for publishing,
which is
and
fine.
allow them to bring the game to new platforms. This is a problem because Kickstarter is selling the community as the central idea.
I don't have an issue with Kickstarter devs getting publishers. A lot of the times a Kickstarter is not enough to actually fully fund the game, but it is enough to get them a publisher. You just have to make sure you're staying true to the what you promised in the Kickstarter. So that's not really an issue.
The biggest voice behind the funding of the game, after all. That's really the beauty of the platform, especially for virtual worlds, at least ideally. But now suddenly you have another person more important than them, which means that the Kickstarter backers are being kind of like pushed to the back and kind of misled. They would think that their voices were important and would be heard first, but immediately after a successful Kickstarter, and Temtem would have a publisher. The final bad thing about the Kickstarter situation was that Kickstarters technically weren't really enforceable, as we talked about before, meaning we see tons of projects basically skate being called failures and having to return their funds. Worse, all Kodama Games had to do was deliver what was promised, and then there were no further guarantees after that they had to satisfy. This could be seen in how the game was originally set to launch in into early access in September 2019 according to the Kickstarter, but wouldn't launch until January 21st, 2020 on PC and PlayStation only. This is honestly still pretty impressive all things considered when compared.
Yeah, it's very common for Kickstarter games to get delayed. Like I'm pretty sure Lumentel just got delayed by a few months. Like it's very common.
To most early access games, they can take years and years to come out. But early access, oh god. So you have a publisher, got crowdfunding, and now are using like an early access funding process. The problem is that
I also don't have an issue with the early access funding.
that means that buyers on Steam are now separate from your Kickstarter audience. They have different desires, and you still have that publisher to satisfy. But to be fair, Crema Games was only 20 developers. That's quite the small development team looking to be the first one to break monster taming into the online world, especially on PC, and the perfect size developer to use early access, to be fair. Their ability to launch a virtual world period and sell 5...
Yeah, I like the fact that they even made Temtem is impressive. Like everything aside, like Temtem is an impressive game in a vacuum. It's just unfortunately it wasn't it unfortunately was kind of like marketed a little bit falsely, if I would say, like and nobody really did anything to change that until after everyone bought the game. But it still did like the things it like. How do you say? Okay, I don't want to say it was like necessarily false marketing because it does have like all those MMO aspects, right? Like, you know, it might not be massive, but it does have like people in the world and stuff. It was basically like a checklist, right? Like, oh, we checked the boxes of the things that are supposed to be in the game, but we didn't really like go beyond that. I guess is what I would say. Like, it by itself, if you want to play Temtem, like it's a good game, good as a single player game. As an MMO, it technically checks like some of the boxes, or MMO Lite rather, that they promised it would check. Like they didn't not fulfill their promises or anything. It's more so just like it feels like on that aspect they did the bare minimum. Like they did exactly what they said they were gonna do. And you know, in some ways a little worse than that because of like how grindy the game was and stuff like that. They did eventually fix it, but they basically just like let Temtem die. Like they didn't do anything to keep it invigorated, which is fine, but it's just disappointing because it feels like Temtem had so much more potential than that.
100,000 copies in just no time was nothing short of successful. But often in the virtual world space and featured on the Death of the Game series, we see games that soar to great heights, starting from humble beginnings, but unable to outrun the immense success and expectations they would often generate after that. This is how, on top of how difficult it is to maintain a game in the most difficult and complex gaming genre that is virtual worlds, that's the thing with virtual worlds. The audience, whether a massive one or not, always had the expectation that things were gonna keep coming and getting bigger. Just like my ex-girlfriend. I personally think that developers can avoid this by designing end states for their world in mind from the beginning, but you can always just try to continue to slowly update the game too, depending on the return on the investment, obviously. Look no further than games like Lineage 1 or MapleStory 1, which honestly make more money than the majority of virtual worlds today, and are both like 20-year-old games. Single-player games with co-op online don't really have to worry about this expectation though, but although Temtem featured a single-player campaign and was completely playable co-op, the game beside that was actually always online, and thus came with more complications.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like if I have the game on Switch, I can't just like play it not online. So again, another sort of disadvantage to the game being an MMO, but not really coming with a lot of the advantages. Like the game should definitely have an offline mode.
And expectations. Easy comparison for Temtem is actually Let's Go Pikachu, which would sell a whopping 15 million copies and was and is essentially the closest thing to Temtem from the Pokemon franchise. Even just visually, LGP featured cooperative play with its single player, which was honestly like a first revolutionary thing for the Pokemon franchise. The thing about Let's Go Pikachu though is that you never have to worry about the game not being playable because it's not online, and there aren't any expectations that the game is supposed to have more content continuing to come out, even if it sold 15 million copies. Had Temtem just been designed like this, it wouldn't have had this negative reception after the cat was let out of the bag. Capiche? But with that comes...
Yeah, design like that, except not with all the bad parts about Let's Go, like, you know, not having wild battles.
Higher standards of making a better single-player game, to be fair. And I think that this difference can be seen when comparing the two games, which probably had, you know, pretty big budget differences. Look at Let's Go Pikachu. It just seems far better put together. Has a more believable world, both in how it looks and functions.
I honestly don't think Let's Go is better put together. Well, Let's Go's not poorly put together. Yeah, that's fair. Let's Go's actually probably... Like, I don't like the format of Let's Go, but in terms of like how the game functions and whatnot, it is actually a solid game from Game Freak, surprisingly.
And it's just better polished. Meanwhile, Temtem has like cool colors, but they're almost like randomly thrown in there just to spruce up environments and don't really have like a rhyme or reason. And the cities and villages feel the same way. LGP also has much better character models, where the ones in Temtem kind of look like generic slot by comparison, I think. So it really depends on what you are looking for. How you can
character models or monster models? Because I feel like the monster models in Temtem are just as good as the Pokemon ones. The Pokemon ones are not anything to like write home about.
In a focused game, there's going to be consequences. While Temtem Story Mode would boast an impressive 20 to 40 hours of play, depending on your skill level, it would only launch with 4 islands.
Okay, the whole how many hours it takes to beat Temtem thing. Like originally people were like, oh, there's like 60 hours. That's because every route had like 6,000 unskippable trainers. They fixed that, but like. I compared it to like, imagine you're playing Pokemon Fire Red, right? And then that first route north of Pallet Town, there's just 8 trainers for you to fight. Like that's how Temtem felt for a long time. Again, very, very grindy, but they did eventually change it. And there was like, they finally kind of relented and listened to the community on a lot of things towards the end of Temtem's life. But there was a lot of like stubbornness from the developers starting from early access all the way until launch and post-launch even when it came to stuff like that. They're like, no, like what matters more is the economy and this and that. And it's like, you guys aren't planning on supporting this game other than just having the servers up. Why do you care? Why does everything have to be so grindy?
Deliver that promised 2 more islands, totaling at 6 under 2 years after its launch, starting with the Sipanku Island, which would then add a new region to travel to and discover, and of course, new Temtems to tame, specifically of the electric type. The most MMO-like feature to come from the update and hit the game for the first time was easily the mythical layers, which were essentially endgame raids of sort, where you could team up with 2 to 4 other players and take on a series of challenges. The catch was that these challenges were largely completed solo, and essentially required your team to perform well and gain the jewels required.
Yeah, you basically weren't really working together. Everybody just had to, hey, it's a game pieces footage, I remember him. Basically, you had to, you just had to basically do it solo and then hope your team did good. Like, it wasn't like you weren't fighting it at the same time or anything. Like, you were at the same time, but it's separately.
The currency of the dungeon to take on the mythical creature at the end of the lair.
Like, they were fun to do once, but after that, you were just kind of like, okay.
And if you succeed, you can then get access to an egg that you then can grow that said mythical creature. This makes it quite lucrative, but it's a bit strange that the endgame content, even if it's group-based, is not really group-based. And stranger, when you spend the whole campaign training up Temtem and you don't really even use them in the endgame content besides refighting the same old dojo leaders. And don't get me wrong, the dojo concept in Temtem is probably more fleshed out in some ways than the gym concepts in Pokemon, but at the same time, they're not necessarily better. And then of course you have to remember that whole 2v2 focus. That was like almost Pokemon-like, but not quite. It just spoke to a mixed direction of the game. With each island and region added was also added more story, which would finalize with the final island added to the game, Arbory Island. Arbory would add a whopping 31 new Temtem and include 2 major cities in Properton and Lockburg. Honestly, Sipanku and Arbory were great updates and added new story content and Temtem to the game. The problem would be, seemingly after the game's launch, these sorts of updates would
I think he missed Kisiwa.
But not the expectations of them continuing to come for the audience, which would create a major rift between the community and Krema Games. The full launch of Temtem would come 2 years after it first entered early access. Temtem would get rather favorable coverage from gaming media too, being seen as a game with a lot of potential, and the closest thing that people could play to a Pokemon online game. Scoring a 73 out of 100 on aggregate review website Metacritic might seem low, but review outlets, like we will cover shortly, like Game Informer, were quite positive about the game overall. Before we get to the reviews, as we always do, let's talk about the biggest controversies for launch for Temtem, and what the new 1.0 launch version brought to the table. Starting with the Nintendo Switch launch. This version of the game was, and still largely is, the worst version of the game. That's because for whatever...
Yeah, it's got issues.
For reasons, Krema Games had difficulty porting to the platform properly. This could be seen in the horrid performance in the game, and frankly, the inexcusable visuals. I mean, remember, Pokemon is almost completely built on the Nintendo platform alone. Krema Games having a poor showing there was consequential due to this. Compare Temtem on Nintendo Switch to Let's Go Pikachu, and it seems like LGP...
I mean, comparing Pokemon to Temtem is not fair.
He was made years ahead, meanwhile Temtem came out after. The next big...
Temtem's an indie game made by 20 people. Pokemon is being made by hundreds of people. And not just that, consider the fact that, like, Scarlet and Violet, Legend ZA, BDSP, right? Consider all of those Pokemon games. Like, you're comparing it to Let's Go, which, like, Let's Go, sure... I don't really like Let's Go that much. Like I feel like if you want to get a better Kanto experience, go play Fire Red. It's got more content, and it's not baby levels of easy. But like Game Freak had one decent running game on Switch, and like I like Legends Arceus, but it has issues too with like performance. Like I feel like only comparing it to Let's Go, I get that there's similarities, but like come on, like one's an indie studio, one's the biggest franchise ever.
Controversy was considering the inclusion of a battle pass. This was on top of the game now costing, due to the inclusion of the 2 new islands, 40.
Yeah, there was a lot of MMO-esque monetization, but not a lot of MMO-esque features.
Dollars in total. Players didn't like the idea of a full box price game also having a battle pass and microtransaction currencies, especially when the battle pass and cosmetic system largely functioned on FOMO and had a rotating system where certain content would then become available. While I don't have an issue including revenue sources in a virtual world, Temtem at this point only had layers with groups and digi layers, which were like duo layers to constitute
Who's Hero Voltzi?
That wasn't just playing the main story co-op. What exactly was the battle pass going towards, if not new content being promised or supposed to be promised?
Yeah, exactly. They're not adding any content. What's the point in the battle pass?
And continued support and updates. Well, as we will find out later, it wasn't used for that, apparently. New with 1.0 was the Tamer's Paradise Zone, which was essentially the battle frontier from old Pokemon games. Brought back
which is cool. That was a cool thing that they added.
Later Pokemon games were lacking it.
But they made you pay. You had to pay to keep playing in it, which was annoying. Like, you'd get one a day. I don't know if it's still like this. You'd get one ticket per day per facility, and then if you wanted to do more, you had to pay Pansuns. Everything required Pansuns. Breeding was super expensive. Oh my god, it's all coming back to me, guys. The PTSD, the hundreds of hours I spent in that cave when early access first launched.
Which was kind of a good idea. The Tamer's Paradise is sold as this in-game zone of sorts, and while it does offer some multiplayer content, it's primarily a zone for checks notes, more single-player content. The concept of a game that focuses on 2v2 battles makes it seem like playing with other players would be the norm, but somehow the norm became 2v2 of your own Pokemon. And worse, while 2v2 is a cool concept that many of us Pokemon fans were happy when we got the chance to play it in the series, it was just that. We were just happy temporarily. It was something cool to try sometimes when you would team.
Yeah, given that the fact that the game is 2v2, like, you think there would have been a lot more, like, co-op-esque dungeon areas and stuff like that, like, where people from online would like come together to do like actual areas in the game, or like like I said before, like a wilderness-esque, like RuneScape kind of wilderness area where maybe you can like pick someone and just team up with them like on the map.
Up with somebody like your rival or somebody else, but designing an entire game around it was basically making a core fundamentally different combat game to Pokemon, which was questionable if it was worth it and if it was even wanted. Because while you might say, well, Temtem's just Pokemon on PC, if it's focused completely on 2v2, is it really? Anyway, what about the critical reception for Temtem? Game Informer would rate the game an impressive 8 out of 10, where they would state that Temtem may look like a copycat on its surface, but its deviations from the Pokemon formula pay off considerably. With unique battling elements and engaging MMO structures,
yeah, it's a
Temtem
solid game.
evolves its
Like,
own
it's not
experience and offers a fast
again, Temtem's not a garbage game. Like, anybody that thinks that is wrong. It's just it had so much potential and didn't, and they ended up kind of dropping it, and now they're working, like, now they went from, oh, let's make a Pokemon-esque game, which is cool, but then they're like, oh, Vampire Survivors is popular now, let's go make that, and like, their next game's probably going to be a roguelike because that's been trending, right? Like, it's nice when devs make monster taming games, but it feels like, you know, you shouldn't just be like, oh, this is popular, let's make this. This is popular, let's make this. This is popular, let's make this. Like, you gotta like keep focusing on the bread and butter of Temtem, which is the original MMO. At least if they're gonna make like a Temtem 2 or something, please God, just make it have an offline mode if you're gonna structure it the same way, because that would fix a lot of the issues. Less grind and an offline mode.
Adventure that even those without a Nintendo console can enjoy. This was quite the positive review, but would sort of contradict CGM's review of the game, where they would give it a 6 out of 10 and state that the world needed more things to do. However, in fairness, the audience initial reception seems to mimic more of the former's review, while over time shifting to the latter. On Steam, Temtem...
Yeah, at the beginning of Temtem's release, like, if you criticized it, people would be like, oh, like, oh, the Temtem Reddit, like, neckbeards, okay? And then, but over time, that sort of, like, toxicity that the fan base kind of developed, it turned on the devs. Like, it used to be really, like, you couldn't say anything bad about Temtem. It was quite hilarious, actually.
And would initially score an impressive...
Like, it's funny because Temtem, a lot of the Temtem hype was bred from the Sword and Shield controversy. And then those people that were critical of Pokemon became the same type of people defending it, but for Temtem.
89% for player reviews would laud the game's cooperative main story, enjoyable gameplay, and, well, make allusions or comparisons to it being an MMO. This was actually initially used positively in these reviews, but as I sort of already hinted at, eventually it would become a negative, as the expectations of the audience playing Temtem didn't seem to align with that of the developers. You could already see the signs or clues when observing a press release after the game's launch, where Crema Games would claim that they were primarily focused on overhauling the PvP content of the game, with the launch of the Showdown mode.
Yeah, they went so hard into PvP and nothing else. Like, I think they were trying to become like a popular esport or something, and that just ended up destroying like anybody's care. And again, when you brought this up to anybody, the like 6 people playing PvP would be like meh, and then they just kept brute forcing it.
Accompanying competitive scene and pro scene, but no signs of announcements of new islands or even new Temtems, which had many fans already scratching their heads.
And then their PvP, their other tournament and all that stuff that went down was all kind of a flop.
months in. The focus on PvP content was natural and totally acceptable, but no mention.
It's fine to focus on PvP content to an extent, but don't like focus on it in lieu of focusing on anything else, right?
The PvE content made it seem like Crema Games was already transitioning out, as PvP content is usually the focus once that starts to happen, as it doesn't need constant new influxes of content to breathe life into the game, like PvE content does. Now, it might seem early, just a month after launch, but the game's story was only about 40 to 60 hours. If you took your time, that's completable after a month of just playing about 15 hours a week, which is only like 3 days of 5 hours of play. That might be a good value for $44, arguably, as a cooperative game especially, but for a supposed massively online game, that was kind of low value. I mean, Guild Wars 1, PSO, and Dragon's Dogma Online all had longer playtimes than that, and those games are also older, and the former more considerably. If the expectations of more were never placed on Temtem, say it was just like treated like a normal single-generation Pokemon single-player game with co-op play or whatever, could things have continued to grow larger and more ambitious from there? That's a serious question that we have to ask our.
Yeah, again, like if they just made it a single-player game with co-op features, or just have that MMO aspect, but have the option of offline, then once the game was done, people would be like, cool, but being clear about that from the start in all advertising would probably get them less sales, right?
Ourselves, and we might never know, because it seems like the game fits that love better than an MMORPG, let alone even just an online RPG or like the baby virtual world. I mean, the game had a random sharding system that made it difficult to even play in the same channels as your friends or the same players in the same channel, period, right? Creating like a type of like community when you get used to that. This was a feature back in Guild Wars 1 that they pioneered in like 2005, where you could select exactly what channel you wanted to play in, skipping this issue altogether. Season 3 would add much wanted challenge modes to the game, adding a different way to beat the campaign and challenge yourself. This sort of stuff did wonders in making the game more replayable, but there was still little in the way of actual new content for the game, even just a few new Temtem, besides the couple mythicals they would add every now and then. If Crema Games didn't want to do any live development.
And the mythicals were part of the original roster. They added them later, but they were supposed to be like they were part of the original like count.
They probably should have made that clear, because it's quite clear it didn't really seem like they wanted to. Showdown wouldn't just be a mode featured within Temtem.
And Showdown was cool, but then they had to shut it down because no one was using it.
Standalone client and be dubbed Temtem Showdown, where it would launch June 27th, 2023. Playable on Steam for free, Temtem Showdown would allow players to not have to level up or catch their own Temtem, and instead pick from presets, sort of like Pokemon Stadium. The community reaction, however, was quite negative, in part because only like 20 people were even playing this new PvP version of the game, and the other part because it seemed like something that not a whole lot of the community was even asking for. As Massively OP would cover, the game director on Temtem, Guillermo Andrades, would push back, stating that the notion that Crema should focus on adding more monsters and zones and dojos to Temtem, arguing that those additions barely moved the player base needle during early access and thus were not sustainable. The thing is that those additions are promised on Kickstarter, meaning that you don't get to pat yourself on the back for them, and they shouldn't be the thing that you're using as a metric to judge new content. When it was early access, stuff meant to complete the game. You could have sold new islands and new content for money, and then tested from there.
Exactly. That's the thing, right? They never tried. They never tried to actually do post-game content. Like, they could have had a second generation update or something with like 2 new islands or whatever. Like they could have done things to do that. Like, I don't know. It just feels like they didn't try to do that. They had no interest in it, and that's part of the reason why like there was like and them saying that there was no spike in players when new updates came out is wrong completely. There were spikes every time a new island came out. Their issue was originally that the new players would leave, so they'd put like months into new content, and then they'd only get like a spike for X amount of time. But if that was paid new content, then that's worth it, right? Like if you put out a new island every 6 months and that boosts your sales significantly, and then things get quiet again, and then 6 months later you put out a new island and it boosts it again, like you're getting money, right? Like charge for the updates then.
Yeah, right? That's what people wanted. Not to mention that the reason that adding...
Or the people might be more likely to use the battle pass in that case, since you have one. Like, have a bunch of cool cosmetics and stuff, right? Like,
new content can not move the needle, so to say, is because your player base is hemorrhaging its population. And the reason for that was reportedly due to the tacked-on grindy economy that kept many players from being able to afford housing in the game, proper Temtem that they wanted, and so on and so forth. He also says that developing the MMO was costly, and that the small bump of interest from monsters and zones would not be enough to cover the expense.
But they don't know because they never charged for it.
Ironically, this Reddit comment would end up being later deleted, probably trying to cover the tracks regarding the MMO comparisons that would kind of...
Reddit, man. These people on Reddit
have become so toxic they wanted to shed them all together.
Speaking of Reddit, we're gonna check out some comments about this video. This video was posted to Reddit and also was deleted. I don't know who posted it to Reddit, but yeah, I don't know if it was deleted by the mods or deleted by the poster. But we're gonna get into some of the community feedback as well.
Together. But it furthers my point that Temtem wasn't just sold wrongly, it was sold wrongly, and then when the developers were questioned about it, they would respond quite emotionally to the community, seemingly dismissing their concerns and desires. Andrades would further that the game's PvP community was big, and that Crema Games seemed happy with entrusting in that audience, over the actual majority audience for the rest of the game. I mean, the majority of the Temtem players I know are couples that played it just together for fun. I don't think that those players have any interest in PvP, and worse, a virtual world PvP without leveling and grinding really has only worked in the case of like Guild Wars. So maybe it could work, but that game's more focused on things like complexity and team fighting and ability builds. Temtem Showdown allowed you to do it all for free, and literally bypassed the paid portion of the game. It was a bizarre business decision to say the least, and basically made it to where all PvP content in the game was done separately and for free. Season 5 would come alongside the introduction of the FreeTem system, September 25th, 2023. The FreeTem system is actually kind of hilarious. It's like Team Plasma from Pokemon, who wanted to free all Pokemon. The difference is they aren't the villains here. And to be fair, Team Plasma's kind of not the villains either, but you can do missions for them and get rewards by letting go of a certain amount of Temtems. The system is actually quite complex in idea, but unfortunately the actual execution was quite simple.
It was so boring.
Let go of certain Temtem in certain regions as a collective and unlock certain drop rates for new rare Temtem. None of these sort of world ideas were even implemented into Temtem.
That's a dope.
Besides the game's story, the world itself had no story. It really felt like Temtem's real issues is just that people wanted it to be so much more. Sure, it was almost this Pokemon-like on PC, but it wasn't good enough to keep people playing it, especially when the dev team didn't seem interested in keeping players around either. Resisting returning to Pokemon, which has released now, at this point, 3 major mainline games since Temtem's launch, totaling at more than multi-dozens of millions of sales, is just a difficult proposition. And Crema Games didn't seem interested in being competitive in a race that they themselves willingly ran towards and entered. The apparent large PvP audience wasn't large enough, and Temtem Showdown, at least the standalone client, would be shut down altogether. January 2024.
Yeah, you can still access Showdown within Temtem, so it's still easy to get into competitive, but yeah, they shut down the standalone client. I remember when that was shut down, I was like, and I had said in so many videos, they need to focus more on PvE content. They need to focus more. And nobody listened to me. I'm probably the biggest creator that was covering Temtem consistently throughout the years. Like, there were a lot bigger creators that would cover it like once or twice, but I was the most consistent. Not even in terms of channel size. I think I was just the most consistent one at the time covering it. Like, I had covered every single update. I was covering it in between updates. I was talking about the game. Like, I was keeping the game very much in the channel's repertoire of content. And I made a lot of suggestions. I tried to, talk to the community about stuff. And, like, the devs just did not care. Like, a lot of monster taming games, I've had contact with most of the devs in the indie scene. Even in the non-indie scene, I've had contact with devs, right? But the Temtem devs, I don't know if they just maybe just didn't like me or my content or whatever. But, like, I've also spoke to other Temtem content creators who felt kind of like the Temtem devs just ignored us for the most part. I have had some contact with one of their community managers who's really nice, but other than her, like, it just seemed like there wasn't really much of a like reaching out to content creators and seeing what our communities are saying, because oftentimes we kind of know what's going on with the communities more than the devs do, right?
Worse, the competitive esports scene would also be shuttered after just a full season. Now, it's a running gag.
It was one season and it was cut, and they spent I remember they spent so much time on PvP.
The death of a game series about esports scenes failing and then being a major reason that, a particular game or company fails. But something we have to remark about here with the esports is the esports can't be forced. It needs to grow organically. And if you're building an esport, it needs to be exciting to watch. Temtem competitive isn't fun to watch. And the reason for that is because it's not made to be fun to watch. There's no pizzazz. There's no excitement in the viewing experience. It just shows matchups, shows movesets, and then players cycle through the moves in Temtem. There's no moments of cheering, big animations like in Stadium or anything of that sort.
Pokemon Stadium is so good.
It's a super sterile experience that likely doesn't capture anyone's interest who isn't already a big fan of PvP. And if you don't believe me, just look at the viewership. I have shitpost videos that I made as a 10-year-old that have more.
Wait, Temtem Esports viewership is relatively small compared to the top esport titles. While the game has a dedicated player base and some competitive events, its viewership numbers on platforms like Twitch are modest. For example, one recent 7-day period showed an average of 18 viewers and a peak of 315. That is crazy. That's wild. However, these numbers fluctuate and some individual streams can reach higher view counts. How much higher, though? That is wild.
Views. And Temtem specifically stated that their goal with Showdown and the comp scene was to make the game a household name. Okay, sorry. That doesn't really sound like a serious thing to say, but it shows how out of touch the dev team at Crema Games was with their own
they
game,
were extremely out of touch.
Confirm my point about the comp scene only attracting elite players from their own audience and little new players. The signs might have been there. The Crema Games was looking to move on from Temtem, at least the game itself, but it's still surprising.
When Temtem Swarm was announced, it was such a big controversy.
As many, myself included, and Crema Games would announce a spin-off game set in the same universe dubbed Temtem Swarm, a bullet heaven style game that focused on 3-player online co-op. This seemed like an attempt to follow the Vampire Survivor trend.
Okay. this isn't a bash at Temtem specifically. I'm getting kind of tired of devs just, oh, this game's popular, let me copy it. Like it's one thing to be really passionate about a specific genre of games. We talked about this in our roguelike video where I was talking about how there's so many monster taming roguelikes, and it feels like the majority of them are just like, oh, roguelikes are easier to make than a full-fledged RPG. Let me do that instead. That's how you end up with a game that nobody cares about, right? Don't just make a game, and I'm not saying they did this, but don't just make a game for the sole purpose of copying another game. If you are really into monster taming games, for example, and really love Pokemon, fine, make a Pokemon-esque monster taming game. If you are just so into bullet heavens or whatever, sure, make a Vampire Survivor-esque game. If you're a roguelike enthusiast, like Carl from Abomination, right? Make a roguelike game. But don't just make games to follow these trends, because it just shows, right? I never played Temtem Swarm. I wasn't very interested in it. But, like, it, to me, and I could be wrong, but it just feels like, okay, Sword and Shield had their big thing, and like people were kind of following off Pokemon before that, like when with the Let's Go games and even Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, so they made a Pokemon-esque game. Now, Vampire Survivors is big, so they're making this. Is the next game going to be a Hollow Knight-esque Temtem game? I'd actually play that. But, like, I don't know. And then all these devs keep making roguelikes only because it's roguelikes are popular, right? The MMO trend was a bit of a thing after Temtem, and none of those games ended up being made. It just, so many devs will just jump on something because they think they're going to be popular by replicating it. And it's just like, that's fine if you're passionate about that type of game, right?
Instead of actually putting more time back into Temtem or a potential sequel, which was obviously far easier.
They basically said they're not making a sequel anytime soon, but they're working on another side game that's not Temtem Swarm. I've heard them say, I can't remember where I saw this, but it's called like Project Down Below or something. My guess is you're in the Down Below and it's a roguelike, because roguelikes are popular. That's my guess here. And I mean, to be fair, Temtem actually did make a roguelike before. Crema did make a roguelike before, so I wouldn't dog on them too much for making a roguelike, but it's like, there are so many roguelike monster taming games, like, you better do something that makes it stand out, because, like, most of the community is getting tired of it.
Community would have quite the tepid response. Like, cool, yet another Bullet Heaven and Hell game made by guys who just kind of seemed to want to abandon their other game. And just when the PR couldn't get any worse, and the community sabotaging was seemingly already bad, Konami Games would shoot themselves in the foot yet again by just being honest, apparently. When CEO Enrique Paños would state that the community expects to add infinite content, which is costly in terms of time and money, and just...
I covered this too. The dev was basically like, I'm the victim, guys. Like I never said anything. I never totally allowed everyone to call it an MMO and use the MMO tag on Steam.
Because it carries the MMO label, but MMO doesn't mean infinite. These are some juicy statements to investigate detectives, so let's dive in. The CEO first admits that the game is an MMO here, then argues against the concept of the genre, continuous content and updates. Now, should MMOs forever release new content? I mean, not if it's not financially viable anymore, right? At least not officially. Let the community do it at that point. But here's the issue. Mr. CEO is acting like Temtem even fucking tried.
Yeah, thank you. They never fucking tried, bro.
French.
Fantastic language, especially to curse with.
Bear with me, guys. I know you like the whole detached detective, but the reality is that's no detective is like that. We're all opinionated, and we all hate certain things. And I hate when developers try to get credit for something that they didn't do. They made 2 content updates, launched the game, and then just stopped updating.
Yeah, and the content game updates were part of what was supposed to be in the game. Like, all the content updates, even post-launch, were part of the Kickstarter.
It, really. Some games from the 90s are still updating, like Lineage 1, which is a massively financially successful game. This idea that they were burned out from the concept already,
my sinuses are bad.
Checks notes 0 months in is just strange. Why even make an MMO, or more accurately an online RPG in the first?
Because it was popular. Like that's what it was. I feel like the MMO aspect, I'm sure they're Pokemon fans and they wanted to make like a monster taming game, but the MMO aspect just sells. I think that's what it is, to be honest.
Either of those games.
It feels like they were passionate about turn-based RPGs and competitive and stuff like that, but they weren't that passionate about MMOs.
Virtual worlds are going to still need content. When we tried to introduce purely cosmetic microtransactions as a way to support us and extend the life of the game, we also received many negative criticism.
Yeah, because you didn't add anything else but microtransactions. Like, hey guys, we got infinite content. The battle pass.
That's because your game had a box price, and
hey, it's Legacy Gaming, I remember him.
Only added new content during its early access period, really? Content that it promised in its Kickstarter? Meaning if you had a plan for new content and were coming out with it regularly, monetization like that would make sense.
Yeah, exactly. If you were having new content all the time, like if you want to release a battle pass to go alongside a new island update, do it.
But you weren't. And thus the CEO would argue this later on in the same conversation, that the game was already completed. Alright. The reception from this debacle was actually so bad that Crema would circle back and attempt to smooth things out.
Then they apologized after.
Still supporting Temtem and were not stopping their efforts to focus on it. But words like that are just words. When every single time that people start pressing you on it, you basically admit that you don't want to work on it anymore. Especially when the game now, even though it wasn't officially, already felt like it was in maintenance mode. Crema Games is an indie studio, who is also self-funded, besides the humble games publishing, of course. This means that they have to either rely on more publishing contracts like that, or pivot to other projects in an attempt to keep making money from new, fresh ideas or games. I defend indie game companies because of this, because it's in the nature of their company. However, that's not the same as holding water for developers moving on too soon or not doing a good job, of course. Anyway, early March 2024, and Crema Games would announce yet another project. And no, not Temtem Swarm either, but a new project almost like—
Oh, this guy's actually really looked into things.
Into a sequel.
Yeah, that's right. It was called Project Down Below. This is going to be a roguelike, I'm telling you. It's not a sequel.
But also not called a sequel, labeled Project Down Below.
It's going to be a roguelike. The Down Below is some mysterious area that nobody knows about. Max should have died there because Max sucks. And it's going to be a randomly generated area. I'm telling you, that's what it's going to be.
Which would have features that they would reportedly want in a hypothetical sequel, but...
Look, our intentions of Project Down Below is to build new foundations, try new things we'd love to see in a hypothetical Temtem 2 by exploring a new combat system, a stronger engine, and more things we can't unveil yet. We hope to learn the proper basis and have enough preparation. Yeah. It's going to be a roguelike, I'm telling you. If it's not a roguelike, I'll be surprised. If it's just a single-player RPG, that'd be amazing. But it's not. It's going to be a roguelike because everybody wants to make a roguelike because nobody wants to make worlds anymore.
Not be a sequel, so it's still a spin-off game. But the thing is do people even have faith in Crema Games to pull that off, even if it is a spin-off game?
Look, Temtem had issues MMO-wise in the MMO aspect, but like it's a solid, in my opinion, for an indie game, high-quality game. Okay, you can't take that away from them. The animations are solid. For an indie studio, the models are great for an indie studio. Obviously, like I'm not saying it's as good as like PS5, AAA, whatever. In terms of like fidelity, in terms of gameplay, it's better than a lot of AAA games. The issue with Temtem is the MMO aspect not being fulfilled. As a like in terms of quality, Temtem, in my opinion, is a high quality game when you compare it to other. Especially 3D monster taming games. A lot of 3D monster taming games look like GameCube games from indie studios, and that's not to dog on them. That's just 3D is expensive, right? I'd say the pixel art monster taming games tend to be like the better looking ones, but there's a lot of Mon games that just they look like late 2000s in terms of like aesthetics and stuff like that. Temtem actually looks pretty good because they really leaned into that like cartoon style,
especially with such a cartoonish.
But yeah, I think I don't know. I think Temtem has its issues, but like if you were to go into it playing it as a single player game, regardless of the fact that it has to be online, which is stupid, it's still a good game. Like it's a solid game on that front.
Lack of accountability for their mistakes or decisions already showcased publicly by them.
But that is fair. Like the developer attitude is something that's going to keep people away from the game. At least the history of their attitude towards the community.
And why would players support the effort anyway, when they really just wanted more Temtem, or just the game to get expanded, or a sequel? The reason that Crema wouldn't and couldn't do a sequel was because, as they would state, unfortunately the stakes are high and there aren't enough resources to achieve what the team would desire the sequel to be, and the sequel that you would deserve.
So you're just going to make a roguelike instead?
Which
That's
is
what's going to happen. I'm calling it. Guys, somebody clip this. Nobody's going to clip it. Nobody's watching anymore. Somebody clip this. It's going to be a roguelike. How much do you want to make a bet?
Still, it begs the question, why not just shrink those ambitions or work on them a bit? Or just be honest. People know that you're a small developer. Just promise episodic content that costs money, and that the support of it allows you to continue to expand the game. And then make more...
Or just make it a single play, make it have offline mode, have the MMO sort of like aspect of people being allowed to be online together, and then just when Temtem 1's done, finish it, and then make Temtem 2.
Ambitious sequels, like the Pokemon franchise. You know that if you didn't want to do live development, that was always a model to follow. Instead, you're utilizing the IP built on this idea that gamers actually liked, but can't really enjoy that much anymore in an attempt to cash in on it. Instead of actually treating it properly and delivering what the audience would want. Maybe the spin-off game...
I'm noticing a lot of gameplay from random people. Where's the Gym Leader Ed gameplay, bro?
It works because Crema does have some
it might have been in there. I wasn't
paying
attention.
Actual management, especially. Something that's not much of a surprise for most Temtem fans at this point, especially the more jaded ones who already quit long ago, was news that Temtem would be signaling the end of their development. May 2024. No more new content and no more new updates for the game.
But no offline mode.
Game would come. Well, save some quality of life updates and the 2 upcoming planned updates. This was after months of debate between the community and the developers at Crema about what Temtem was supposed to be classified as. According to Crema, who would defend themselves, this issue being an issue didn't even make sense to them, because Temtem was incorrectly placed and tagged as an MMO on Steam.
They did that themselves!
When it was planned to be more of like an MMO light, whatever the hell that is. They would then further explain that they had to shift the game to be more traditional MMO-like to meet those expectations, which caused Temtem to grow beyond their original intention.
they chose to put that MMO stuff that made it less good in place.
And grasp.
Oh, he named it Rasengan. That's
that
awesome.
They understood part of this was due to the fact that people were calling the game an MMO, which would lead to poor expectations. But I don't
It was advertised as an MMO.
get it. It's not just the Steam tag that you somehow got cursed with. You put massive in your Kickstarter, and your CEO and director kept calling the game an MMO, which was confirming that idea, right? And to act like there wasn't a design path forward there, I mean, remember, Guild Wars 1 was putting out expansions year after year. Temtem fans had no issue with paying for content and paid expansions. They had an issue with these bare-bone microtransactions meant to make more money without providing any actual content.
Exactly.
It wasn't a good value proposition. The community would respond to the community follow-up posts with pretty thoughtful advice and ideas of how Temtem could be better progressed. Temtem's community seemed pretty intelligent when compared to most, based on the feedback that I've seen on Reddit so far, and even more educated about possible pathways forward for Temtem than the developers were, but this isn't totally surprising. Krema Games was a talented small studio largely behind mobile games prior to this. We actually have no idea if any of the developers had any pedigree for virtual worlds, which is incredibly rare because, well, virtual worlds are incredibly rare and it takes a long time to work on them, or being just a turbo nerd who played and studied so much of these virtual worlds that it becomes a skill that you develop and can't even sleep at night because of there wasn't any proof that they had the experience, which was probably the worst part of it all. When you don't have the experience, you don't have any idea how fast problems can start to occur, fester, and then create such a problem. In an attempt to deliver on the Kickstarter promises before leaving the scene, despite saying development was cancelled, was the release of the arcade bar, June 10th, 2024.
That was also
an area
part of
that
the
allowed you to
Kickstarter.
converse and hang out with other players and play new minigames that were being introduced to the game, including top-down shooters and a side-scroller platformer. Problem is that this is the last part of the promise update for the Kickstarter, or at least the last piece of it. Meaning at this point, 400 or so players was like the peak population. So nobody was even left to enjoy this new update, let alone socialize at the new location. This sort of stuff needed to be in the game from the jump to help create an environment that fostered sociality. Coming at the end just feels like something that they tacked on the things just to get it.
Yeah, it just felt like they had a checklist of things they needed to get out by that point, and they were hey, I remember, hey, he's one of my subscribers. What's up?
Done with. And
What's
to
up?
satisfy those guarantees that you made,
I swear he's one of my
two more updates
subscribers.
with some quality of life changes and rank changes, and then nothing more. Things had finally dried up. Krema Games was ready to move on, or try to, as they would release the aforementioned Temtem Swarm November 2024. At only $8, Temtem Swarm was a relative success, managing to sell around 150,000 copies.
Yeah,
But
that's
this was
fine.
a far cry from Temtem's numbers. The population in Temtem...
It's fine as a spin-off if they kept working on Temtem 1 or like, I don't know. I don't want to keep devs anchored to working on Temtem forever, but it's just the way things went down. We're just so, off.
Temtem would jump up during this time, perhaps due to some ability for some crossover to be created, or just have some returning players come back because they were hoping for new content. But within a few months, those numbers would drop back down to under 500 peak players. Temtem would continue to hobble on, despite celebrating that they had just reached 2 million total users by January 2025, which was super impressive for an indie studio.
Yeah.
But the time in the sun for the unlikely Pokemon alternative for the wanting PC audience had largely come and gone. And although Krema Games had intentions of moving on with the Temtem name, it seemed like many had moved on from them. That's what's so hard about competing with a titan like Pokemon. It's not just beating them once or twice, it's that they just launched nearly 5 games during the same time that Krema Games launched 1 game.
I wouldn't worry too much about that. Like even with single player games, like Cassette Beasts released 1 game and a couple DLC updates, and if a Cassette Beast 2 ever happens, that's going to be years from now. You don't have to compare how many games Pokemon's releasing, because at the end of the day, the non-Pokemon monster taming scene is its own community, right? There's a lot of monster taming fans that play other monster taming games as opposed to Pokemon, but not in a vacuum. So Temtem came out. I'm going to play Temtem. Oh, Coromon just launched. I'm going to play Coromon. So there's a constant stream of non-Pokemon monster taming games from different studios. So not having a game come out every year is fine, because monster taming as an entire genre is competing against Pokemon because it's so big. So Digimon just came out, right? Okay, 6 months later, we got Monster Hunter Stories 3. In between that, we have some indie games, right? Lumen Tale's coming out next spring. So there is a constant stream of non-Pokemon monster taming games. So Temtem doesn't need to put out a game every year to compete. But what I think it should do is put in games with more focus on single player. If they're gonna make the next Temtem like this, just do a single player game with online functionality.
You might win, like I said, one small victory.
Look at Digimon Story Time Stranger. It has DLC coming, but no one's expecting forever content for that game.
But unless you can establish yourself as something unique and different, and, gobble up your own market share, whether through competition or that aforementioned uniqueness, you will eventually get drowned out again by the sheer amount of Pokemon content that exists, and not even just the games. That's where trying to be so much like Pokemon, except in a way that people didn't really ask for, 2v2 combat entirely being the focus and all, really ends up biting you in the rear. Ironically, another famous Japanese monster fighting game and series also made a similar mistake, Digimon, who also...
This didn't age well with with Time Stranger. This came out 4 months ago.
Struggled to find their own identity after the popularity of Pokemon made them kind of shift to trying to copy off of them. Digimon would go from being one of the biggest franchises to being kind of relegated to like a side franchise, despite...
Digimon never really copied Pokemon though. Like which games are a copy of Pokemon?
In my opinion, having the better world design and concept.
I mean, I guess like, oh, they had 2 versions, Dawn and Dusk. Like, eh.
Difference being Digimon is still kicking, able to diversify enough and build upon its core in some ways. And Temtem, I hope that...
Yeah, Digimon's still doing really well in Japan, even besides the new all the Time Stranger stuff.
They will still keep kicking, but with both games having less than 1,000 players combined, it doesn't seem like it's trending towards that direction. Unless Kurama Games can really pull a rabbit out of the hat with their new project down below. Fans might be bitter, but they forgive when the quality is really good and unique. And remember, there wasn't really any Pokemon likes online on PC. Sorry, I always get carried away when that thing starts playing. We have reached the end of the timeline and gathered more than enough clues and bits of evidence to diagnose why Temtem's development was discontinued. In case you missed any of the clues along the way, why did Temtem die? Misunderstanding of the genre and suffering from the poor identity and issues that would stem from that.
Yeah, the MMO genre more so. I feel like they understood the monster taming genre pretty decently, but not enough to like overshadow, or not enough to not allow the poor aspects of an MMO to overshadow the game while not adding the benefits to an MMO.
New content and new Temtem.
Yeah, not adding new Temtem besides those mythicals, which were part of the Kickstarter anyway. Definitely hurt them as well, but just adding new Temtem wouldn't have been enough because that's not really like a new Temtem is cool, but that's not really content. You need stuff to go alongside the new Temtem.
Using a lackluster value offering of monetization, poor community management, and leadership.
Yes,
it was too Pokemon-like. Incredibly high expectations.
It was very Pokemon-like, but what was kind of glossed over a little bit is the battle system is different besides just 2v2. It's got a hold system, it's got stamina, it's got no RNG. It does have aspects to it that are a lot less Pokemon-like than you might think just by looking at it.
Developers moved on to other projects. Pokemon is still the most popular franchise in the world, all these years later. That alone means that we will continue to see more games like it, on top of course, more Pokemon games, like Legends ZA coming later this year. But I really hope that the grandpas at Game Freak can get bit by the multiplayer bug, or at least the bigger bug, and express a desire making a Pokemon game virtual, because it's going to be incredibly difficult to make one as an indie developer, or a developer without serious backing. That's where I kind of feel for Kurama Games, really. They had such a good idea that grew to a point that they could barely even manage to develop it themselves. But unlike Among Us, which we just covered, a major success that wasn't really entirely expected, Temtem didn't reach overnight success. It was genuinely a good and wanted idea in game that grew over time. Kurama just failed to deliver on that concept.
It had a good timing too with the whole Sword and Shield Dexit thing.
Over time, and gave up on it even. People just didn't move on in a flash. They kept
I thought they were going to make a Temtem anime. What happened to that?
Giving them time. They wanted more Temtem. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments below if you...
Yeah, so go check out Nerd Slayer Studios. This is a really well put together video. I wish I had more free time. I would love to make like these like 40-minute like documentary style videos. But yeah, check out his channel. I'm gonna subscribe to him now, and it'll be linked below. You can check out the full video if you want to see like the first 7 minutes for context. If we go over to the Reddit, someone posted this. It says deleted, so I don't know if the post was deleted or the user was deleted. But here's some of the comments, and I think I echo a lot of these sentiments. The quote, Temtem was so close, but so far it feels right. I'd summarize the death of the game as a horrific accessibility by design, which mainly boils down to an excessive, grindy, and overly complicated breeding system that deters casual players from participating in late game content. With only hardcore players, a niche live service cannot sustain itself, especially if it doesn't do DLC content with new regions and playable characters. I agree with this completely. One thing that they didn't mention too much in the video was the devs were so focused on the hardcore, like 6 people, that they completely like left everyone else out. They figured that the hardcore fans would be the ones that would stick around, but if there's not enough of these hardcore people, there's no one to stick around, right? If you're going to focus on PvP, you need PvP people. You can't have 6 people playing your game on I'm using the number, I don't think it's 6, but you know what I mean? Like, you can't have like 20 people playing PvP because they're just going to keep battling the same people over and over again. This is something I've criticized the Kindred Fates alpha and beta. Well, the beta has some single player content, but they were focusing so much on the PvP when it was like 3 people playing that like it kept people out of it, right? Also, if there's only like 6 people playing PvP and then new people want to come in, you're just gonna have 6 people that are like super like OP into it, and then you're not really gonna have like a wide array of different skill levels, right? Yep, I felt like they added a ton of grinding to the game to keep people playing and wasting time like a live service game, but without new content. I treated it like a single player game and got bored of the grinding quickly. Yeah, grinding for money was insane at the beginning. Once I got to the end game and started looking for how the breeding worked, it just seemed way too tedious. I enjoyed the game and finished as a fresh attempt at monster taming, but I don't think that it's more friendly to casual players. But I don't feel like this is fully justified. Back when I started playing in Tuckma, all the way until I quit sometime mid last year, I'd always been able to just buy items from Discord and later Auction House. I've done breeds myself later on, but they never felt worth it just to just outright buying it from AH. The Auction House didn't release with the game. First of all, the Pansum grind with dojo matches were also decent. I think there were 15 other reasons the game died. That was a big reason, was the money. And the breeding is definitely part of it. People were just buying stuff from the auction house. Hi, lifelong Pokemon fan here. Temtem's breeding was very straightforward and a lot easier to get perfect Tems. It was, but they ran out of breeding, so you'd have to keep getting new Temtem. So you couldn't just breed infinitely. Pokemon breeding was more random, but the same two Pokemon could make Pokemon forever, right? You can get a Destiny Knot with 2 high IV Pokemon and just get them to keep making 5 IV guaranteed Pokemon, right? With Temtem, you needed to like buy these items that were consumable, and then it would run out of breeding potential. So I do disagree with that. Hard disagree. I played Pokemon since Yellow and competitively since XY, and I found the grind to breed Tems a lot harder. The breed limit is insufferable. Exactly what I just said. So yeah, this is basically a lot of people are saying the issue with the game is the breeding. They don't want to add content, and that's kind of what the sentiment has been with regards to Temtem for years at this point. And I saw this video, one of you guys mentioned it to me before. Hi, Nadia. Randomly showing up in the middle of my videos. So yeah, the common sentiment from the community seems to basically just be more or less the game is too grindy, the breeding is while like quote-unquote straightforward, has a limit, which kind of makes it suck. There's no content being added, and that's basically the overall thing. And like I said, like I don't want this to be a video just like hating on Temtem, because Temtem did some things right, and that quote, like the first commenter said, Temtem was close but so far, is like a perfect analogy. Like they had all of the building blocks in place, but they didn't want to execute this. My desk is dusty. Sorry, guys. They didn't want to execute it in such a way that would benefit anybody except hardcore players. And even they ended up getting sort of isolated because the competitive scene died anyway, like I predicted it would. But anyways, guys, what do you guys think about this whole situation? Do you think I'm right about Temtem down below, that it's just going to be a roguelike game? Not that roguelike necessarily means bad, but I just feel like roguelikes are popular. Let's make a roguelike again. And do you think Temtem 2 will make the same mistakes as Temtem 1 if it ever does come out? Let me know down below, and thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.